a program of caution, but a deep social reform involving not only economic and technological aspects, but also political, institutional, and even cultural dimensions seems the only way out in the midst of dramatic transformation of the world system. In 1956, the first Prime Minister of India, while talking about second five-year plan in the Parliament, I quote, "We are engaged in shaping the future of India with the burden of history and sense of humility, taking its millions forward. The ultimate aim, as we envisage, is the objective of socialist pattern of society. 20th century has seen a far-reaching changes all over the world. There have been wars and revolutions. Any plan to make we make is subject to greater political, economic, and technological change," unquote. Dedicating the Bakranagal Dam to the nation, Jawaharlal Nehru in 1954 called it as temples of modern India, monuments to a nationalist vision of modernization and growth. After the independence in 1947, India went on to build over 3,000 dams, and it believed would improve the quality of life and providing drinking water to many, while supporting economic growth by diverting water for power and irrigation to the field. Indira Gandhi, an assertive Prime Minister, in 1969, nationalized 14 national banks, commercial banks, by promulgating an ordinance to that effect. This act was not only an instrument to bolster her image of being pro-people, but also gave her a handle to acquire the wherewithal to finance social goals in the future. Manmohan Singh, present Prime Minister, who was then the Finance Minister in 1992, marked the most radical break from the economic policies the country had pursued since independence. It altered the course of India's economic and social structure, integrating the economy with the emerging world order and changing the way India's economy and economic institutions would look in times to come. Indian leadership thus was determined to plunge into liberalization, privatization, globalization bandwagon. Of late, the Indian public policy has sought qualitative improvement in the economic progress of the country. In an attempt to contain the desired objective, political leadership in the country introduced five-year plan as a strategy from the very beginning of the independence in the country and the state rule. In keeping with the Millennium Development Goal adopted by the United Nations in 2001, the Government of India set itself reducing poverty and other causes of human deprivation and promoting sustainable development by 2015. Though India managed to increase food grain production over the years such that the country was no more dependent on food subsidies from outside, yet the food grain distribution became highly skewed. Similarly, most poverty reduction programs that were inaugurated as early as decade of 1950 failed to meet expectations. The planners adopted two-pronged strategy for poverty alleviation since 1950s. The first one was indirect intervention, what is known as trickle-down approach, which was adopted, and we have some community development projects, high-yielding varieties of seeds by way of introducing green revolution, land reform, etc. in the first indirect intervention. And the second, direct intervention, had some other kind of programs which have been implemented called, like for example, Small Farmers Development Agency, Rural Work Program, Employment Guarantee Scheme, Integrated Rural Development Program, Jawahar Rozgar Yojana, Indira Awas Yojana, and recently Mahatma Gandhi's National Rural Employment Guarantee Act 2005. Even the land reforms did not beget the required results, though it did lead to some certain structural changes in the matrix of agrarian production. Several issues can be highlighted with regard to low industrial production in the country. The following could be enumerated as some of the obvious consequences of industrial policy implementation. That is, large gap between the target and achievement, underutilization of capacity, concentration of economic power, elite oriented consumption, growth of regional imbalance, and industrial sickness, etc. could be stated some among them. Even the temples of modernity could not live up to its expectation. Higher standard of living as well as the development opportunities for all stemming from the greater resources generated by the economic growth are ultimate aim of the development policy according to the government. This implies that the need to bridge regional, social, economic disparities as well as the empowerment of the poor and marginalized, especially women, to make the entire development process more inclusive. The draft 5-year plan, subtitled Faster, More Inclusive and Sustainable Growth, puts growth debate in the right perspective in 2012. In spite of this, most of the development projects have proved to be failures to bring about development in the to the common people, the tribals and the marginalized. These failed development projects serve the interest of the power itself by uncompromisingly reducing poverty to a technical problem and by promising technical solutions to the sufferings of the powerless and the oppressed. The hegemonic problem of development is principal means through which the problem of poverty is depoliticized in the world today. The idea of development, which has many interpretations and therefore become confused, are quite often powerful in the policy making because they provide spacious kind of hanger for different persuasions to hook on. The idea of social capital has been one of such ideas. It may be said that the social capital and closely related ideas of trust and reciprocity and the ideas of activities of civil society participation and non-government organization have come to constitute new weapons in the armory of anti-politics machine that is constituted by the practice of international development. In all the BRICS nations, the imperative of economic development are starkly evident, both in their relative salience with overall government policy and in the importance of specific objectives. In all these cases, powerful external pressure for such change have come up against very deep-rooted set of domestic, cultural, political, economic, structures and very distinctive national traditions leading to developmental trajectories that continue to vary very significantly. This duality speaks to the tension between an aspiration of international influence and a continued sense of vulnerability, and to the difficulty of having to defend oneself against an increasingly intrusive world that challenges the old established national ways of acting and thinking. It also speaks to the contested and yet unfinished debates as to how these countries should embrace a liberal, globalized order and what is the actual space for autonomy might be in the face of changing character of the global economy. Muito obrigado.
The event now I'll introduce Professor Frick Kronje from Northwestern University in South Africa, immediate past president of the South African Sociological Society, worked as a labor sociologist much of his life, worked in many parts of Africa with special dimensions of political participation, and some of his research also runs into questions around sustainable development, and was paper marries up quite well with Professor Nicholas.
Thank you, Tom. Also, thank you very much for the invitation. My title is The Global Position of South Africa as a BRICS country. In 2010, South Africa was the last country to join the BRICS, and currently it holds the chair of the group. Against this background, as well as South Africa's strategic position in Africa, the political and economic systems of the country are constantly from all over the globe under the magnifying lens. This paper, there's just a little structure. This paper will critically analyze the political and the economic sectors of South Africa. I will look into macro level issues, for example, good governance, economic growth, developmental programs and projects, and also issues related to sustainability. I'm going to use dependency theory and world systems theory as conceptual pointers. Dependency theory by Gunnar Frank and the world system by Wallerstein. Systems theory is the underlying base of both the dependency and the world system theory. And before I commence to a brief discussion of world system and dependency, just a few points on systems theory, which is important for the rest of the discussion. Firstly, a system implies that the parts are interconnected and interdependent. Secondly, systems are not homogeneous networks. There are powerful nodes that dominate the areas around them. The third implication of systemness is that the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. Lastly, societies combined may form a world system. Then the conceptualization, as I mentioned, dependency theory and the world system theory. Very, very briefly, due to the time. On dependency theory, Frank, according to him, capitalism and modernization from first world countries had a negative and a destructive influence on third world countries. As a matter of fact, wealthier countries, the core, actively underdeveloped the poorer countries, the periphery. Frank actually used the concepts metropolis and satellite, but in line with world system theory, I'm going to stick to the concepts of core and periphery. Modernization theory, for example, Rostow, reflects the viewpoint that the inability to develop underdeveloped countries is simply due to a lack of exposure of capitalism and westernized thinking. Underdeveloped countries must fully enter into the free market system in order to get competitive, and in so doing make rapid progress along the developmental pathway. Quickly on to world system theory. Dependency theory is one of the most important building blocks of world system theory, together with the Annales School in Paris, and of course the work of Marx. As already indicated, the similarity between dependency and world system is embodied in the idea of a strong differentiation between core and peripheral countries. Core countries have a very central and a direct role to play in relation with peripheral countries. Core countries have integrated economies, which include primary, secondary and tertiary sectors, whilst peripheral countries lack backward, that is production, and forward, marketing and markets linkages between the sectors.